One.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another presentation during Reptile and Amphibian Days. My name is Miranda Dowdy, and I work at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences as an educator. We are so excited to have you here for this amazing presentation. I am so excited to get started. But before we do, we're talking about animals that we can find right here around where we live. Sorry about that dog whining in the background. I want to know, what exciting reptiles or amphibians have you found? What is your most exciting find? I know for me, in my backyard here, I actually figured out that copperheads love to eat cicadas. That was something that I did not know until I saw one climbing my fence and was wondering why. And so I asked around and figured it out. And then I actually saw one eating a cicada one night, which was very exciting. Before we get started, I do want to introduce you to our speaker today. And he's going to tell you about some amazing adventures he's been on right here in Orange County. So Bradley is a third-year PhD student at North Carolina State University, and his research focuses on public engagement, especially in citizen science and in general in science, ecology, and herpetology. I've known Bradley for a long time. He is a wonderful writer, and you can actually find his work in publications such as Scientific American, the Smithsonian Magazine, and Atlas Obscura. So Bradley, thank you so much for coming. Maybe you can start us out telling us about your most exciting find around the area. Maybe not necessarily for this project, but kind of anywhere in the world. What was your most exciting, like, reptile or amphibian?
Oh my gosh. Well, thanks so much for that introduction, Miranda. Great question. All over the world is tough. I did have the great fortune of getting to study abroad in South America and got to see some really amazing animals down there. And that included some time in the Galapagos Islands, where I got to see Galapagos tortoises, which are just totally unreal. And they're just walking around. You're just on one of these islands, and a turtle will walk by on the sand, and then a sea lion will go, and then there's a sea turtle coming up. It's just an amazing place with all kinds of really incredible wildlife. And yeah, I can't think of a better place to be a kid in college that's interested in ecology. So yeah, maybe the Galapagos tortoise would be my favorite find internationally. We can talk about locally a little later, but yeah.
Because I know you have some cool stuff to show us. So Bradley, with that, I'll let you take it away and show us what you've been working on.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And then switch this over. Cool. Okay. How's that? Good?
No. We practiced this just right before we started.
Yeah, I did. Let's try it again. So let's see.
While you're getting set up, I'm looking in the chat and see what exciting finds people have had. So Carrie, her exciting one, not near her house, was a pygmy rattlesnake out in the sandhills. And at her house, she found a rough green snake. That's very exciting because, of course, they live in the trees. And so it's hard to see them when you're walking around.
Great.
All right.
How's the slides now?
Looks great.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining. So again, my name is Bradley Alf, and I'm a grad student at NC State studying wildlife conservation. And I'm going to be talking to you all today about something I'm really excited about. Which is this idea that I'm calling the tiny wild. And so we as people, a lot of people, if you're interested in going to Reptile and Amphibian Day, I imagine you're interested in being outside and finding cool animals and that sort of thing. And I think broadly, we kind of have this conception, this idea that wild places, that places where you can go on high adventure are these remote places where you'd have to go far away to find it. And my talk today is sort of about what we can find close at hand, which is in many ways just as cool as some of these more remote places that have really amazing wildlife also. But we're lucky to live in a place, especially if you're interested in reptiles and amphibians, where there's a ton of really amazing animals and some beautiful landscapes and all things that you can find, even within your backyard. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so to start things off, I'm just going to have a quick question for folks that are watching this, which is, what do you think of when you think of wilderness? And I know this is sort of a big idea. It's a big concept, and can have different meanings sort of depending on what context you're thinking about. But I would love to know what people that are watching this are thinking about as they're thinking about the word wilderness.
So while we're waiting on that, I think that's such a big question, right? And I think you'll kind of explain a little bit more what you mean by that. But for me, like my experience where I truly felt like I was in a wild place was visiting Yellowstone in the winter. And I got to do that with the museum and the Educators of Excellence program. And it was just so amazing feeling like you were somewhere where no one else was, right? Like you couldn't hear any sounds from the urban world or the human world. And so, you just felt like you were somewhere where if you were by yourself and had no resources, like, it's nature against you, or, you were in nature and you were surrounded and you were depending on what it can provide to you. So that was an amazing experience for me, and where I truly felt like I was in the middle of the wild.
Totally. Yeah. What a great example. I don't know if there is a more wild landscape in North America, or at least in the United States, than in
hard to find somewhere where you're so far separated from human development. Let's see what people are saying. So Sarah says the wild, camping, trees, woods. Carrie said land unaltered by humankind. Beth said vast stretches of undeveloped land, which I guess that would describe Yellowstone National Park very well. Big trees and for forests for a wilderness. So those are some of the answers that are coming in.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for writing that in. And I totally agree. When we think of wilderness, we do think of what people are saying, going camping, going backpacking, going on these, remote excursions into wilderness areas that are, little used by people, where you can have adventure and find something new and see something interesting. And I think that's all true, but I think that we can also think about it in a much more local way. And we'll be getting into that throughout this talk. And so I'm going to start off by talking about where I live. So I live in Chapel Hill. This is my apartment. For those that don't know, I don't know if folks are joining. I guess folks have been joining the Zoom call from all over. But Chapel Hill is a college town in North Carolina, right near Raleigh and Durham and some of the bigger cities in the state. It is classified as urban where I live. And for good reason, I'm 9,820 feet from Franklin Street, where folks like to go celebrate in non-COVID times. It's amazing how this photo kind of gives me chills looking about it, given the year that we've all had. But, celebrating after Carolina beats Duke, everyone goes out to Franklin Street, which is certainly a developed urban area, in a space that, in a lot of ways looks like it's designed for people. My apartment is 10,507 feet from the Old Well, sort of the center of the U campus. Again, highly developed, lots of brick buildings, academic halls, that sort of thing. And so when I think about wilderness, at least, before the last few years, and certainly before the past year, when, because of COVID, we've all sort of been forced to be thinking about sort of more local ways to engage outside. This is not really what I thought of when I thought of wilderness. And, I've been fortunate to be able to go to some really amazing wild places that to me do feel like wilderness, like Big Bend National Park, where you can see stars like no other place in the world, probably. Big Bend is 8,062,560 feet from my apartment. It's pretty far away. The Tetons, also about 9 million feet from my apartment. Huge, beautiful landscape. You can see bears and wolves and moose all over. Huge swaths of beautiful forest and mountain peaks. The Sierras along the John Muir Trail, 11 million feet from my apartment. Huge, beautiful landscape. You have to fly to get there. And then you have to backpack in for a week to get to this particular point. Olympic, all the way on the other side of the country in Washington, 12 million feet from my apartment. Again, these are remote places. This is what I've thought about for a long time when I think of wilderness. We were talking about the Galapagos earlier. 14 million feet from my apartment are the marine iguanas that live there on the beach in some really amazing landscapes that people only even have been living on in the last like 150 years or so. You can go diving off the Galapagos Islands, 15 million feet from my apartment, and see huge schools of fish and sharks. You can go across the Atlantic to Iceland and see these massive waterfalls and huge geological features. 16 million feet from my apartment. But what is close at hand? This is, I think, another kind of wilderness, and maybe you'll be convinced by this by the end of the talk. This is a creek in my neighborhood, about 1,500 feet from my apartment. It is, if I'd zoomed out a little bit, covered in trash in places. There are huge rows of apartment buildings right behind this. But in this space, in this tiny little frame that we're looking at, I think we could call this wilderness, at least a tiny kind of wilderness, with the moss and the small tree. Looks like it's growing out of the rock. And so I've been thinking about this for a while, and it inspired me a few years ago to start this project that I've sort of come up with the name of Wilderness Within Walking Distance. And I think it's become even more prescient in the last year with COVID, where we're sort of restricted in where we can go. And so this project was focused on trying to find all the reptiles and amphibians that are native to my county in North Carolina, in Orange County, within walking distance of my apartment. And so I consulted actually the museum's records on this and some citizen science projects like iNaturalist and HerpMapper to get a sense for what species have been seen in Orange County, and came up with a list of about 50. And yeah, about 2 years ago, I just decided to see how many I could find within walking distance of my apartment here. And so I started really close by and was able to, just in the parking lot, 200 feet in radius around my apartment, was able to find 4 different species. A common 5-line skink in the top left corner there, American toad in the bottom left corner, a green anole in the bottom right corner, and a DeKay's brown snake there in the top right corner. And this was sort of amazing to me. 200 feet from my urban apartment in a pretty developed residential area, there are at least 4 species of herps, of reptiles and amphibians, living out their lives, finding things to eat, laying eggs in some cases, carrying out entire lives in a developed area right here. And I thought that was really amazing. And so I broadened out my search just a little bit. I went 2,000 feet now from my house, about half a mile. I could, go outside of just the parking lot and begin crossing a road and into some woods sort of in the surrounding area. But again, we're still talking about pretty developed urban areas. I wasn't sure what I'd find, but so far I found 23 different species, including Cope's gray tree frogs in the bottom left corner here, sliders in the top left corner, green frogs, and a pair of black racers here. Again, I thought this was really amazing, and it really inspired me to keep looking. 23 different species of reptiles and amphibians within a half mile of my house. And what was pretty amazing was not only getting to find these species, but getting to really spend some time watching them and seeing what they're doing, how they're going about their lives, just down the road from the old well in Franklin Street. And so I've expanded it even more. We were talking about walking distance. This is now 20,000 feet from my house, and I found 44 species. That's about 4 miles, which is starting to push the limits of walking distance, maybe, if you have to walk there and then walk back. But I wanted to complete this goal. And so now I'm at 44 species out of about 50 that I think are possible to see where I live. And we'll get into that a little bit in a second. But yeah, starts to include some really cool other species like snapping turtles here that I found in a drainage ditch, upland chorus frogs, which if you live in North Carolina, you've been hearing a lot for the last month. Spotted salamanders, really amazing salamanders with a cool life history that we'll talk about in a minute. And northern water snakes here in the top. And 40 other species, all in the few miles around my house, essentially. And so this has been a really fun project, and has sort of intertwined itself with some other things that I'm interested in that I'll talk about as we go on. And I'd like to just invite people, if you have stories, I know there's a bit of a delay, but Miranda can interrupt me if people are responding. I'd love to hear some of the cool animals that people have seen themselves near their house. And you can just type that in the chat, and Miranda can let me know as people are responding to that. Because I'm sure, I like reptiles and amphibians. I'm sure there's people out there that are much better at me than at finding these animals. And so here's my list. I have it kept track of a whole spreadsheet here and ranked according to how hard it is, in my view, to find them. And so these are the different species, and we're sorting them by like the closest individual I've seen to my apartment. So far, the record for the closest is the green anole, which was on my porch. And as we get further away, I think some of them get a little bit more difficult to find. But still, more than almost 40 different species within about 3,000 feet of my apartment. And this is where we're at now. These NAs here are the species that I haven't seen yet, but I think that I could. And a lot of them are rather hard. I have not had good luck finding king snakes or hognose snakes, some of which, hognose snakes in particular, need some pretty specific habitats that I am not really sure are near my apartment, but I'm hopeful, especially when I go out in the fall, when they're a little more active, that I'll find them. Other things I'm still looking for, mole king snakes, red-bellied water snakes. I've seen them around Chapel Hill before, just not sort of in the area that I'm considering walking distance, but I know they're out there and I'm going to find them. And then we get to the ones that are very hard or maybe even impossible. If you've seen any of these around Chapel Hill, definitely let me know. I would love to hear it. Soft shell turtles. There's a record or two on like Herp Mapper. I don't think it's possible now. Timber rattlesnakes would be pretty crazy. Anyway, but yeah, this is my list. This is sort of what I've been doing for a while. Miranda, has anyone responded with what they've found?
Yeah, so we have a couple of responses, not just reptiles and amphibians.
Yeah.
And Tara said they found some spiny tail lizards. I'm not sure where they live. Joy found an owl. Let's see, Carissa has seen lots of snakes and salamanders at their house. Liz found a blue-tailed skink when they were building their garden. And Sarah found a bat.
Nice.
I've been scared by a bat when I opened my umbrella outside. I felt really bad for disturbing it. Ton of eastern fence lizards. Mm-hmm. Carrie found a red-bellied water snake near her house.
That's still on my list.
Yeah. And so those are the ones that we've seen so far.
Great. Yeah, well, that's awesome to hear all that. And I'm glad other people are out there sort of noting what all they've seen. Somebody mentioned five-line skinks, or what some people call blue-tailed skinks. They're the bane of my existence because there's 3 different species that we have, at least in Orange County, that look very similar unless you have them in your hand and can count the scales around their lips, essentially, and on their tail. And if you know anything about those skinks, they're super fast and hard to catch. So I've seen a lot of them all over the place, and I've only caught a couple, and the ones that I've caught are all the common 5-line skinks. But yeah, southeastern 5-line skinks and broadhead skinks I hope to find soon. Well, great. So I'm just going to now move into talking just a little bit about my process for this and sort of how I'm thinking about adventure in wilderness as I'm doing it. And so here's one of the most productive spots that I've found in walking distance near my house for finding reptiles and amphibians. I do know the people that own this, so I wouldn't recommend generally going to abandoned houses and looking around without sort of knowing who owns it and that kind of thing. But this abandoned house for me has been really productive because there's all this trash out there. And, you know, as someone that cares about conservation and the environment and is studying that kind of thing, I'm definitely not in favor of seeing a lot of trash out in the woods and debris and that kind of thing. But that said, you know, old pieces of tin and plastic and wood are great places to find reptiles and amphibians. And so I go here and flip some of the cover boards sometimes, which are just any of that debris scattered around the house, and see what I can find. And this area is 1,800 feet from my apartment. And there's this, you know, really horrible inside to it that I don't go into. But outside, there's all kinds of little scraps and stuff. You can find worm snakes, which are these neat little snakes. Probably, I would say, the most common snake we have here in the Triangle in North Carolina. They do really look a lot like worms, but you can tell a worm snake, it has sort of a two-toned body color. So the top is sort of a brownish tan, and the underneath half of them is sort of a pinkish color. And you can find a lot of them out here. There's this dam along University Lake where you can find some really amazing things. This is 2,400 feet from my apartment, I believe. You know, and these are both things that I've mentioned so far. They're, you know, they're human constructed areas. You know, we're talking about a house and a dam, but you know, wildlife is resilient and in some instances can exist really well in these spaces. And so I found a snapping turtle here. It's a common snapping turtle. This one in particular, I actually found halfway up this dam, just like crawling up it. I have no idea how I was able to grip that. But yeah, that's that snapping turtle. There's another picture of that same one. There's a big pile of rocks at the base of this dam where I have seen, I kid you not, 20 to 30 northern water snakes at once. And so they group together in big balls, and they'll spend the winter together there, and they'll kind of emerge in the spring. And if you catch it at the right time, you can see all these snakes just like pouring out of the rocks. It is really amazing to see. You know, you might have seen that Planet Earth episode where there's lots of these like racers in the Galapagos that are like chasing down iguanas. And it's this total amazing dramatic spectacle, but like you can kind of see that 2,000 feet from my apartment. It's amazing. In the same area, I've seen when the water level gets really low, all these catfish, all of which are, I don't know, 10 or 11 inches long, and they'll group together where the stream is trickling in to get more oxygenated water when the water levels get low and the oxygen in the water gets all used up. This is a drainage ditch behind Carrboro High School. You know, at first glance, it is nothing spectacular. You know, a lot of the water in here is just runoff from a parking lot. And yet in a different light, it can be really beautiful and amazing. This is a picture I took when it was snowing, and there's this amazing layer of younger pine trees below, a larger canopy of larger pines as the snow's coming down. It was really beautiful. And, I've been to a lot of different places to see wilderness all over the world, and this was one of the most spectacular things I've seen. And it was in a drainage ditch. And not only is the landscape cool, the wildlife around this drainage ditch is amazing. You can find narrow-mouthed toads. They make sort of a cheeping sound, almost like a chick. You can find spring peepers, which at least here in North Carolina, we're going to start hearing a lot of shortly. You can find eastern newts, which are these guys swimming through the water. Newts are really amazing animals. They spend their when they are babies, they are born in the water, and then they lose their gills and they crawl out of water, and they exist as this red kind of salamander called an eft. And then they return back to the water and they live their adult lives in the water, and that's what we saw there. And you can find all that in a drainage ditch right here. You can see the pollen pooling on the water in the summer and back swimmers kicking around. I was blown away. I've spent, I don't know how many days in the water with a snorkel on in this retention pond behind a high school and seen some really amazing things. This is a pile of dirt that I thought looked beautiful. And right in this area, I've seen copperheads and garter snakes. Right by the lake at University Lake. This is 3,400 feet from my apartment. You can see garter snakes. You can see the water pooling with runoff and making a literal rainbow slick on the water, which is really beautiful. Probably not good for the wildlife. You can see old trees, you can see sliders. This is a culvert that's like 100 feet from my apartment below the parking lot. And right here, I've seen queen snakes and spotted salamanders living out their lives again in places you might not expect. Cricket frogs are another cool species I found down there. They're a frog that, if you've ever heard their call, it almost sounds like you take two pebbles and whack them together. Or like those rattlesnake eggs you used to get at gas stations and things, just kind of metallic rattling sound. That's the sound that they make. This is one of the last places. This is what we call a vernal pool or an ephemeral pool, which are just places in the forest floor where there's enough water that it forms these temporary pools that are really important for a lot of different species, including salamanders, which will breed in these because there aren't any fish that'll eat the eggs. And so I found in this vernal pool some salamanders doing exactly that. These are spotted salamanders. And it's one of the most amazing things I think you can see in the Eastern United States is the annual migration of the spotted salamanders from their sort of underground homes where they live a lot of their lives. And on the first warm nights of spring, warm rains of spring and in February, they will crawl out of the mud and cross roads by the dozens, and you'll see them going together in these vernal pools, laying eggs. And I mean, these salamanders, they're 7 inches long, beautiful, spotted with yellow spots and sort of a gray rubbery skin underneath. It's really amazing. And again, this is something we can all see right outside our door in our neighborhoods. And these are the eggs that they lay in these vernal pools. And so I think the lesson here, what I'm trying to say is that, especially this past year during COVID, we've all been really restricted in where we're able to go and what we're able to do. But for me, at least, this has been a bit of a blessing because it's forced me to look a little closer to home for adventure and for wild spaces. And I've come to the conclusion that, there really are some truly amazing wild places and creatures to see and places to explore just down the street. And I think all of us, it would behoove us to go and explore some of those places. The snorkeling off the south coast of California is pretty amazing. You can see sea lions swimming together. But maybe 10 miles down the road from me, you can go scuba diving in a wrecked airplane and see bass swimming around within this sunken airplane. This is high adventure. You can do this right outside your door. This guy was not happy with me. So the wildlife that we can see nearby is amazing, but the adventures that we can have are too. So you can have an amazing rock climbing adventure in the Front Range of Colorado, or you can go a few miles hiking along the Eno River in Durham, and you can go rock climbing there too, if you know where to look and what it takes, especially in the South, where we're sort of, it can be harder to see the landscape under the greenery and the vegetation. All it takes is looking, and you can find some really amazing places closer to home than you'd ever think you could. Related to this is a project I've been involved in for a while called Never Home Alone. The idea of this is, what life can we find? What is the biodiversity of indoor spaces? So you don't even have to go outside for this. And this is a citizen science project on iNaturalist. And basically we've found that indoor spaces have been completely overlooked by science. We probably know a lot more about the biodiversity at the bottom of the sea than the animals that live literally within our own homes. We're finding things out like these long-bodied cellar spiders have probably been living with us for at least hundreds of years and have co-evolved sort of with people to live in our homes. We've learned house mice sing. You can think about that the next time you are going to sleep. Within the baseboards, there's a house mouse that might be singing to you. These are all things we knew nothing about until recently. You can find hundreds of species within your own home. So far our project has found 21,000 different observations of wildlife within indoor spaces, over 3,600 species. A study that was done a few years ago was just looking at a handful of houses in Raleigh and found 1,000 different species within these homes. And all of these creatures are living their lives, hunting, hatching from eggs, eating, breeding, all right under your nose. And what it takes is stopping to look and listen and pay careful attention to what is around you. Because if we give it a chance, life can eke out a living in a drainage ditch, in a culvert, or in your baseboards. And so sort of tying this together, there's an idea in conservation biology called conservation across scales. And I think it's related to what we've been talking about here today. And the idea is that protecting nature, protecting the environment, conserving land, it is not something that should only happen at these massive scales in a national park in Ecuador that's millions of square acres or something like that, millions of acres. That the idea is that it's important to protect large tracts of wilderness, but it's also important to take the time to protect these smaller tracts of wilderness. So the stream and the culvert and the moss and vegetation that grows by your neighborhood. is also important, because as we've seen, there's all kinds of wildlife that calls these areas home and is able to make a living there, is able to live there. So the idea with conservation across scales is the idea that we should protect these smaller tracts as well, that they also have value. A ditch can be an important refuge for some species. But it's not just good for the wildlife. I think it's also good for us. It's the reason we build parks in cities. I think humans have a desire to have some kind of connection to nature and to what's outside. We're not as individuals, creatures that exist very well in complete isolation from the outdoors. And this is important for conservation, because when you give people an opportunity to have a connection to nature, to have a connection to local spaces, they're more likely to protect it. It's this idea called sense of place, which is, that if you are familiar with the Decay's brown snake that lives in your garden, or that the frogs calling in your pond every February are chorus frogs, you have this sort of deeper connection to the landscape, and that imbues in you a desire to protect that landscape. And so that's why I think it's important. Yellowstone, I think, is super important. Glacier, I think, is super important. I also think Umstead State Park is super important. And I think, your neighborhood park and playground and culvert are all also really important. And there's even a more practical side to this, which is that, international flights to go somewhere like here in South America, there's a pretty tremendous cost in terms of carbon emissions for international flights. And so even reducing the amount of flights that you take, especially out of the country, just a little bit, can have a big impact on protecting the environment. And you can, in a lot of ways, have a similar kind of experience in nature and in wilderness, even if it's the tiny wild just in your backyard. And just wrapping things up, so about 6,000 people have climbed Mount Everest. If you take a shovel out in your backyard and decide to find a spot that you want to dig a hole, I would bet probably no one else has ever dug a hole right there before. And I would bet you could find something that no one's ever seen before. And I would actually bet that if you closely cataloged all of the arthropod species, the bugs and spiders and insects that you see, that you would probably find one that's new to science and is undescribed. And you could do that digging a hole in your backyard. I think that's incredibly amazing and is something we can all be thinking about as we're sort of locked in these days. And sort of building on this, maybe folks have read this book. It's called The Forest Unseen. And it's this sort of amazing study in the micro nature and the tiny wild, as I've been talking about today. And essentially, the author ropes off a square meter of soil in the northern Appalachian Mountains, and for an entire year goes there and sits by that square meter and records what he sees and writes about it. And if you read this book, you'll get an understanding for the amazing different kinds of life that can exist in even a tiny area. And I think it's important for us thinking about how we protect the spaces that we like. And so wrapping things up, these are 3 pictures of my cousin who came to visit a few years ago, who's, I don't know, 7 years old or something, and was running through the culvert. One of the photos that I showed earlier was the same culvert. Having a pretty amazing adventure. And it got me thinking about the book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And, I think it's no mistake that when the kids in that book wanted to go have an adventure, they didn't, go on a road trip or something. They all got together and went into the closet in their parents' room, right? And they had an amazing adventure there, just crawling through the wardrobe. And I think we can think about similar things if we're reflecting on the nature that's close at hand. So with that, yeah, I would encourage everyone to go find some wilderness, go find some tiny wild nearby, find some snakes in your yard. I would love to know what folks are finding. And so you can use this hashtag wilderness within walking distance if you want to share what it is that you're finding. But yeah, I just encourage everyone, pull up Google Maps. This is sort of what inspired me to begin with is, turn on terrain view on Google Maps and look for dense areas of forest and woods that you've never been to before, and go explore, go see what's out there. Go off trail, lay down on your stomach and look at a salamander. You can get a snorkel from Walmart. That's where I got mine. And you can snorkel in the creeks and ponds around here and see some pretty amazing things. But yeah, I would love to see what folks are finding. And so with that, I will wrap it up and open it up to questions. Thanks everyone for watching my presentation.
Thank you so much, Bradley. I know I am very inspired to go out, even just in my yard, and dig around in the leaf litter to see what I can find. And that reminded me of a story actually, just in my front yard. I have a lot of leaf litter, and so I can move it around, and I'm always finding Decay's brown snakes and worm snakes. And one of those, it was a nice warm day, and I was kind of moving things around and looking around in there, and was finding kind of handfuls of these little snakes, and actually came across an albino worm snake.
Gosh.
Yeah, and so our our collection manager, Jeff Bean, will never forgive me for not calling him and letting him come and take photographs of it. But it was an adult, and of course it's probably reached adulthood because it was, they live kind of under the leaf litter and things like that, so it wasn't exposed to the predators seeing it. But yeah, I mean, this amazing find in my front yard is beautiful kind of yellow worm snake with a light pink belly and red eyes, and it was just such an exciting find then, right? And just, I love to go out sometimes, and I almost have to force myself to do it and go sit quietly and listen and observe, and leave your phone in the house, and don't play music in the background, just enjoy being in the space that you're in, right? So
totally. Gosh, what an amazing find. That's so cool.
I know. Now, yeah, and I'm sure you're like, oh, I want to take a photograph of it too.
Yeah.
I'm tempted.
Would have been great for this presentation, Randy.
You can dig around in my front yard and see what's there. Yeah, so we don't have any other questions. We did have a question earlier from Beth, and she wanted to know, today is a beautiful day. It's warmed up from the weekend where it was a little chilly. And so if you weren't here sitting in your apartment on Zoom, like, where would you be? Would you be having an adventure? And what kind of adventure would you be having, Bradley?
Oh gosh, that's a great idea. I mean, I would love to be out finding my first snake of 2021. Still hasn't happened. I saw a dead worm snake. That doesn't count. It has to be alive. Yeah, I've been actually trying to section hike the Mountains to Sea Trail. And so my next leg of that is sort of along the Eno River going west through the past Hillsborough. That's probably where I'd be right now. It does look, I'm looking out the window right now, and it looks like a beautiful day to find your first snake of 2021. Yeah, and I mean, just personally, I'm sort of always, so I do a little bit of rock climbing, and the Eno River has some very surprisingly big boulders that you can totally rock climb on. And so I'd be out looking for that too. Yeah.
Very exciting. I know every time I have a 4-year-old, and every time we walk down the greenway and, are passing over the creek, he's like, detour into the woods, like down to the creek. And I've seen a salamander in that creek, which I thought was like, there's all this urban area around me, and, the drainage, and a lot of times the creek is just a little trickle. And so I thought, nothing like that would be living in there, but, we've seen it just by, squatting down and looking and, moving some things around a little bit.
Yeah, I think we could all take a page from Sebastian's book and just wander where our mind takes us. That's sort of the whole point of all this, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. It's pretend like everything is brand new, right? You have brand new eyes that are learning literally everything. And I think that's, a lot of the projects that you've talked about, even the one in our house, we don't know what's living with us, right? We don't know what these things are doing, how they're spending their lives. And so there's so much to find out just by, thinking in terms of a tiny space, right?
Really?
Speaking of like a specific space, Liz wanted to know how many lizards or snakes have you found in the creek? And so I don't know which creek they're talking about specifically for you, but
I mean, let's see. I don't have I used to like remember exactly how many different snakes there were that I'm looking for. But I mean, yeah, just so let me talk about the creek that's just right across from my apartment. And I should say, actually, I live in Durham now, but this was my old apartment in Chapel Hill. And I still go back there to continue this project, even though that's no longer my apartment. I don't know whose apartment it is now. But just literally across Smith Level Road, 500 feet from my apartment is a culvert that goes under Culbreth Road, actually. And there's usually like a bit of a trickle, and there's a creek going down from there to Morgan Creek. And yeah, again, I mean, there's like trash everywhere. There's, you can't like look in any direction except right down at the creek without seeing, another person's, like a house or an apartment or something. It's a tiny little tract of woods. And in that one little area, I've seen a northern water snake, musk turtles, 3-line salamanders, 2-line salamanders, slimy salamanders, dusky salamanders, cricket frogs, green frogs, pickerel frogs, American toads, box turtles. There's probably more. I mean, at least a dozen different species, and it's tiny. And I think that's where we think about this conservation across different scales. It is so important. This tiny little ecosystem is home to all these different species. And actually, at one point, I saw an apartment that was just like draining its pool from the winter or something, and they just like I don't know, set up like a fire hose that was draining from the pool like directly into the creek. And I was like so bummed because I'm sure all that water had all kinds of like chlorine and stuff in it that's really not good, especially for amphibians, which have such sensitive skin and are sensitive to any kind of pollutants or anything. But I'm sure the person that did that, was thinking, what? How is this hurting anything? There's like a handful of trees and a little trickle of a stream. Probably nothing lives here, without knowing all kinds of species that call that place home. And so I think it is important to reflect more closely on these smaller, tiny wildernesses we have close by, because that's the only way we're going to protect this stuff.
And I will say, my neighbor has small kids too, and so sometimes we go in their yard to play. And I was walking by their air conditioning unit one day, and where the condensation drips out, there's like this tiny hole about this big, and it's usually full of water, when the air conditioner is running. And there was like a medium-sized green frog just like hanging out in this tiny pool of water, like,
wow.
And like, there's a creek, the house across the street, but that's like the closest kind of water source other than kind of this tiny pool. And it was deep enough that he could dive down where I couldn't see him. But I thought it was so amazing just to see this green frog hanging out in this pool. And of course, lots of people can see like American toads or Fowler's toads, in and around their house. But yeah, I mean, that green frog just in that tiny pool of water was so amazing to me that I thought, they're so, the animals around us living in these urban areas have adapted so well to the changes that we've made to their environments, right? And you never know what you can find without looking. We'll have a talk on Friday morning at 9 a.m. from Jerry Reynolds, one of the other staff at the museum, and he's done a 13 years long maybe project of documenting his neighborhood box turtles. And so he lives maybe in Nightdale or something like that. I can't remember exactly where, but and it's just this tract of woods behind his house and in his neighborhood, and he's documented over 40 individual box turtles. Wow. Just in his neighborhood, because he's looked for them, and he's, like you, he's kept kind of this document with photographs of the turtles, and his neighbors have helped him out and sent him pictures. So it's amazing what you can find when you're looking.
Totally. Yeah. No, it's amazing. I mean, it's a trope from Jurassic Park, I think, that life finds a way, but it's totally true. If you give it a chance, if you give it the space and the resource, it doesn't have to be perfect. I think nothing in conservation is about the elimination of any possible trace of people. It's about finding the balance where we can coexist with nature. And there's all kinds of amazing stories of that happening, like the box turtle. Another one that comes to mind are manatees. And so manatees during the winter tend to group together. I'm not a mammologist, but I think the idea is over winter, they kind of group together in these nearby, in like estuaries and things closer to shore than they usually are. And a lot of that ecosystem has been destroyed by construction. Everyone just wants the whole coast of Florida to be one continuous beach, and that's just like not great for the manatees. And so what they've started doing instead is grouping together at the outflows of nuclear power plants. And you can, because the water is kind of warm coming out of the nuclear power plant, it's totally clean. It's just water that's been boiled. And these manatees, there's these just incredible pictures of them grouping together by the dozens, sleeping through the winter together, and in the background are these huge smokestacks from the nuclear power plant. I think that's really amazing.
Yeah. Amazing story. Thanks for sharing that one. And so as we wrap up, I have one final question for you, and that is, what inspired you to take on this project? And if I wanted to do it around my house, how could I get started?
Great question. I mean, I think I was inspired to do this. It was before the pandemic, but I think it was like a trip or something that I was going to go on got canceled. I'm trying to remember what it was. It might have been out, on a backpacking trip or something. And I was kind of bummed about that. And some friends and I decided to, it was a backpacking trip, because we decided to backpack, through the wilds of Durham instead. And so the Mountains to Sea Trail kind of goes through Durham, and it's in some pretty developed areas, but is still really cool. And you can still see some really neat stuff, even if you're sort of camping in people's backyards along the way. And I think that was maybe the original inspiration for thinking about this. But in terms of how people can get involved, I mean, go out there and look for things. No matter where you are, you can be in the middle of New York City and see some amazing things. I mean, like I said, you can be in your home and see some amazing things. And, if you want to join a community of other people that are interested in this kind of thing, there are various groups that come to mind, but relevant to my research, so I study citizen scientists, so people that participate in scientific research projects that are organized by scientists. And there's some really great ones for documenting nearby wildlife. I'm thinking about the Great Backyard Bird Count, for instance, where people count the different bird species that come to their feeders. And some people have seen, I don't know, over 100 species at a bird feeder, if they just, take the time over years to keep these lists. Other projects like iNaturalist are great for just documenting all the different species you see. And Herp Mapper is one that's specific to reptiles and amphibians. And that can be a really great way to get involved and sort of see what other people are seeing. and at the same time be contributing to the preservation and the conservation of these species, because scientists use documented sightings of these different animals to better understand, how climate change is impacting them, for instance, or how range maps might be shifted due to, new development and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, if you're interested in helping out with one of these projects, I would totally recommend getting involved with something like iNaturalist.
Yeah, I love that you brought up iNaturalist, because it's also a great way if you do not know how to identify whatever species you were looking at or you have taken a photograph of. There are lots of people who are great at identifying things and can you can just put it in there and they'll identify it for you, which is great. And people can connect your findings to other projects. So it's a really, really great resource. And I always have it on my phone when I'm walking around and when I do document things and take photographs of things, I always put it on iNaturalist. So it's a really great resource. And I think we have the link that we can drop in the chat as well to that. Awesome. Yeah. And so thank you so much again, Bradley. I think we can all see why you are a wonderful writer, just the way you are inspiring with your words and your photographs and your storytelling. So thank you so much again for being here.
Thanks for having me. This was wonderful.
Yeah. And thank you all for attending this presentation. We hope that you are inspired to go out and search for the tiny wild around you, and tell us about it. You can tell us about it on our social media channels. You can use that hashtag that Bradley provided us, so he can figure out what you're finding as well. And we have lots more programs coming up. Like I said, if you want to find out more about box turtles potentially in your backyard, then join us on Friday at 9. But all week we have things all the way through Saturday. So go to naturalsciences.org and click on Reptile and Amphibian Day to look at those and register for upcoming programs. And if you are a member, thank you so much for being a friend of the museum. And if you are not, then maybe this is a chance for you to join and help support programs like this one at the museum. We couldn't do it without our members. And if you join right now during Reptile and Amphibian Day, you can get a free Reptile and Amphibian Day t-shirt. This year, we have the wonderful, amazing marbled salamander. Have you found a marbled salamander, Bradley?
I have like 1,800 feet, I think.
Nice. I'm glad that that's like in your brain, exactly where that marbled salamander came in. So again, thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you at another presentation this week. Bye-bye.